Okay, so I think we're on the record. For some reason, are we on record? Yep. Okay, so this is lecture 4 for 091, section 4. And we want to discuss about complex number systems or complex numbers. In Bangla, we call it Jotil Shankha. Okay. But yeah, just ignore it. It's just stupid or whatever. So just like real numbers, there are numbers called complex numbers, okay? And let me just briefly give you a historical idea of how these things emerged in the first place. So let's say you are considering an equation like this. Well, what does this mean? Well, you just want to find the values of x that will satisfy this expression over here. সো এটার মানে হচ্ছে যে তুমি x এর এমন সব ভ্যালু চাচ্ছ যেটাকে স্কোয়ার করলে নেগেটিভ নাম্বার আসবে, একটা নেগেটিভ 1 আসবে আর কি। So if you think of any real numbers, you will find that this equation is never satisfied. I mean, what we can take, let's say we can take x equals to 1. 1 square is just what? 1. But it's not equals to -1, right? Can you guys give me some more examples where you can select x as any real number and see, okay, let's call it equation 1 and see if 1 is satisfied. By satisfied, I mean the left hand side, which I write as LHS, is equals to the right hand side. Can you think of any real number that will satisfy this equation number 1?
Sir, -1 square.
Okay, let's take -1 whole square. But -1 whole square means multiplying -1 with itself, right?
Sir, root 1, root -1, maybe root হওয়ার কথা বলতে।
Okay, so you are telling me that I can take square root over 1. Is that what you're suggesting? But this is also 1, right?
হ্যাঁ, মাইনাস তো এখনই আচ্ছা, এটা মাইনাস কি দেওয়া সংখ্যা হয়ে যাবে।
Yeah. So this is more like a, you can try any real number, positive, negative, really doesn't matter. You can try any real number, but you will see that this simple, innocent looking guy is not there. That means for any real number, this equation is never satisfied. So this is not the proper history. In fact, the proper history tells us that the idea of complex numbers were there, but people never really paid too much attention to it because they were really busy with finding out the properties of real number. But once they had a cubic equation, I mean, this is a quadratic equation, and don't worry about if you don't understand what is a quadratic, what is a cubic equation, don't worry about it now. We'll get to that later, okay? So cubic equation means হচ্ছে তোমার ত্রিঘাত সমীকরণ যেখানে x এর পাওয়ার 3 পর্যন্ত যাইতে পারে, ওকে? মানে এরকম একটা জিনিস, let's say x cube equals to -1 or something like that, okay? So এটা একটা small example of a cubic equation. So they were trying to find a solution of this cubic equation. And from there, they saw that while one of the solutions came in terms of real number, the other two came in terms of this guy, square root over -1. Okay, someone gave a text on Discord, I think. Oh, not in this channel. Okay, good. All right, so now this guy is not a real number. The square root over -1. And this is denoted as I. This I stands for imaginary. So, this is not a real number, so people started to call it a imaginary number, the square root over 1. In fact, later on, this I came to be known as the unit of imaginary numbers. So let's consider that equation again, this x squared equals to -1. And let's put x equals to square root over -1 and see what happens. If we do that, then this becomes -1, right? So the equation is satisfied. But the square root over -1 does not belong to the real numbers. So what people did is people called it an imaginary number, and a complex number
স্যার
is
এটা রিয়েল নাম্বার না হওয়ার কারণ কি?
রিয়েল নাম্বার না হওয়ার কারণ হচ্ছে রিয়েল নাম্বারে তো তোমার কি আছে, পজিটিভ নাম্বারস, নেগেটিভ নাম্বারস আর জিরো, তাই না? রিয়েল নাম্বারের সেটটা ওইভাবে ডিফাইন করা হয়। এখন স্কোয়ার রুট ওভার নেগেটিভ, হোয়াট ডাজ দ্যাট
স্যার
মিন?
রুট ওভার তো ইরেশনাল নাম্বারের মধ্যে পড়ে, আর ইরেশনাল নাম্বার তো রিয়েল নাম্বারস এর মধ্যেই পড়ে।
But there is a root over of -1, right? This is square root of -1. How do you find the square root of -1? That's the question. You have, some sort of a mechanism to find out the square root over any real number. Let's say square root over 2, square root over 23, square root over, let's say 3/5, and so on. But we don't know what happens. Let's say I have this square root over -25. So what can I do? I can decompose them as the following. The square root of 25 is pretty easy. This is just 5. But there is this square root over -1 over there. So the point is, so far, if you are working with real numbers, then you really don't know how to explain this or compute this. While you are working in reals, because in the set of real numbers, there is no such thing as a square root over negative something. So you really have to step outside the domain of real numbers. So yeah, does that answer your question? Right.
Kind of, sir.
Yeah. So this is something completely new. Okay, it's like an alien or something that people have never seen before. So from there, they called it the imaginary unit. Or unit of imaginary numbers. And since it's a unit, it's like a 1. It's like a 1. It's not 1, obviously, but if you can recall yesterday's discussion, when we were talking about distances in real line, we defined something called a unit distance, right? And within unit, you can build up anything you want. I mean, just take a look at this boxes, for example. So if you consider this small box over here as a unit, then let's say I want to have 2 boxes. What can I do? I can take 2 units of this box, and this thing is my 2 box or whatever, right? So once you define a unit, you can build up arbitrary things with the help of that. So this is the starting point of, talking about complex numbers. The imaginary unit, which is known as the square root over -1, which is known as I. And what you can do is that you can build up any imaginary number with I serving as the unit for imaginary numbers. This is our starting point. So once we define this I, which is defined as square root over -1, you can multiply I with 2. Let's say this is 2I. You can multiply this I with 3. You can multiply this I with square root over 2. Then I. You can multiply this with 3 by 5I. That means in general, you can have any number AI like this, where I is the imaginary unit and A belongs to some real number. Any number in this sort of a form is called an imaginary number. Okay, so I know this might be new for some people. So any questions so far? Anything that's bothering you? Just feel free to ask. It's a thing that we defined. It's like a magic stick.
Sir, I is an imaginary number.
I is the unit. Yes, I is the unit.
But if it's imaginary, how it falls under real number set?
No, it doesn't fall under real number set.
You have written a subset
Oh,
of
AI. A belongs to R. Okay. A itself belongs to R, but AI, when you combine any real number multiplied with an imaginary unit,
that becomes
thing-
real number.
no, that becomes imaginary number, as I have written over here. এ তোমার রিয়েল নাম্বার হইতে পারে, রিয়েল নাম্বারের সাথে তুমি যদি ইউনিট ইমাজিনারি নাম্বার মাল্টিপ্লাই করার পরে যেটা পাবা সেটা হচ্ছে ইমাজিনারি নাম্বার হবে। ওকে, ওকে, any more questions so far?
I কি সবসময় root over -1 হবে নাকি কিছু
I
হতে
is
পারে?
always, yeah, I is always square root over -1. This is how we define I. So
Okay.
let me just give the definition of I. So this is the definition. All right, so yeah, so let's so what we did, let's draw a picture. Let's say this as the set of real numbers. Okay. However, your I, or square root over minus 1, it does not belong to the set of reals, right? So that means I is somewhere over here, outside real numbers. And what we said is that, if I can have any number that has this particular form, I'm calling it an imaginary number. So any number with this form will lie outside the real numbers, like this. So if you draw another line like this one, then all these red dots will contain numbers like this. That means, some real number multiplied with some I, that is the imaginary unit. And from this diagram or this picture, you can say that all the real numbers are subsets of these imaginary numbers. You can think of it like that, but the context is more broader, and now we will define it that way. So bear with me for now. Let's define a number z that is now written as, let's say, x plus iy, like this. It's very weird, right? Because this I is the imaginary unit, and I'm saying x and y, they will belong to the set of reals. And now what am I telling you? Well, I'm telling you to combine them. That means add them. Sorry about that. So any number with this form, that means that carries one pure real part, and this part will be called a pure imaginary part. Any number that contains a pure real part, that means one part of it is real and the other part is imaginary. Any number with this form will be called a complex number. And if I, draw a picture again, let's get rid of these red lines like this. And this, this greenish line, or light green line, whatever you want to call them, this is the set of complex numbers. In fact, what you can do is that you can take, what I said y belongs to R, right? So y can take any value in R. So if you put y equals to 0, then 0 times I is equals to 0, right? Do you agree?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in that case, this z will reduce down to x only. That means you will only have a real part, right? So in that sense, every real number itself is an element inside the set of complex numbers, and we'll define the set of complex number in a bit. So this is the notation, this C, and there's a vertical bar. This means the set of complex numbers. So this tells you that complex numbers, the set of complex numbers will be the bigger set, and the set of reals are just a subset of those complex numbers. So let me make these things a little bit clear. Set, that is, let's define the set of complex number. it's denoted as, write a C like this, and then put a vertical bar. What is this? Well, C, or C and this vertical bar slash whatever you want to call it. These are collection of elements like this Z, such that Z is equals to X plus IY, such that X comma Y belongs to the set of real numbers. This is the definition of a collection, or the set of a complex number. And if you want to look at some examples, let's take an example like Z1 is equals to 1 plus I. Here X equals to 1, right? Because any number or any complex number will have this form, X plus IY. And if you compare this expression with this Z1, then you can see that, oh, this X is equals to 1. And what about Y? What is Y? Can anyone tell me what is Y in this example? Z1.
Sir, root over -1.
No, Y is just 1.
Y है, Y just one है, সহগটা
Yeah.
something. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, just remember this definition, okay? So you can have another number like this one. Let's say -2 plus 3i. In this case, X will be given by -2, Y will be given by 3. Okay. You can
Sir,
have,
what is that SF?
which one?
The first line, X plus IY
Belongs to. That symbol means this symbol, right?
No, before that, before
Oh,
X.
ST. Oh, this means such that. Just a shortened way of writing things. Yeah. So you can take another example. Let's say -15 minus 5i. In this case, X will be given by -15, Y will be given by -5, and so on. And unlike real numbers, this complex number have two parts, right? That is X plus IY, like this one. We are calling this part the real part, or how to say this, the real. I don't think some people use coefficient, but that's not a proper term to use. We'll just call it the real part of Z, and this Y, it will be called the imaginary part of Z. That means any complex number will have two parts, like a two-story building or something. One, the real part. This is just a real number. And the other one is called the imaginary part. This is the real number that appears in front of I. Yeah. So this is the idea of, introducing complex numbers. And any questions so far? Any more questions that you want to ask? Okay, so now that before I started the recording, I told you that maybe I'll try to make sense of that, plus minus weird rule that I think everyone knows, right? That if you have a plus, if you have a minus, that gives you a minus sign. If you have a plus, if you have a plus, that gives you a plus sign. So I'll come to that. But before I come to that, there's a thing that I'll need to introduce. And these complex numbers, they have two parts, right? One real part and an imaginary part. So what this really tells you is that it's a number with two components. I really don't know the Bengali of component, ভুলে গেছি কম্পোনেন্টের বাংলা কি ছিল, যাই হোক ওটা মেইন ফ্যাক্টর না। ফ্যাক্টর ইজ ইফ ইউ রিকল যে আমরা রিয়েল নাম্বারকে কি করতাম, একটা লাইনের থ্রুতে ডিনোট করতাম, তাই না? 0 1 2 এর মাঝখানে কোথাও 1.5 আছে, নেগেটিভ নাম্বারগুলো এই পাশে, লাইক দিস। So is there a way we can, represent complex numbers graphically? The answer is yes, but this time we have to plot them in a plane. In the case of reals, we could plot them in a line, but since it has two components like this, x and y, where this one is the real part, I'm writing this RE just as a shorthand notation and writing this y as IM, that means imaginary, as a shorthand notation. So it has two independent things, right? So we have to plot it in a two-dimensional plane. And let me try to draw the plane first. Don't worry about the details right now, just enjoy the show. So what we can do is that we can take any complex number and plot it in a plane like this, where these red lines, these are called axes. These red lines, they are called axes. So these guys over here, it's called, this line is called the x-axis. This is called the y-axis. Okay. So what do we have? We have a complex number that looks like this. And we want to represent it in these coordinates. But now, since I have chosen some axis, these two lines, this y-axis and x-axis, these are just real lines. But there's a catch. I'll come to that in a bit. But first, let me label them. Let's call this O. O is the point where the coordinates, if you don't know what coordinates are, well, coordinates are just, labels that you put over a point to indicate how far it is or where is it. That's it. Okay. So this O, I'm calling it the origin. And by default, we can always take the origin to be at 0, 0. What does that mean? It means the value of x and the value of y at this point is 0. Both of them are 0 at this point. So let me label them now. Let's say this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5, -1, -2, -3, -4. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3. Okay, let me get rid of these things. minus 4, like this. Okay. So we have labeled this, grids as real numbers with, an unit interval. That means each of these dots have a distance of unit or a distance of 1 in between them. Now, I'll do some relabeling. This axis, this vertical axis or the y-axis, I will call it the imaginary axis. And recall that I is our unit of what? Imaginary number, right? And x, we will call it the real axis, where our unit is just 1. Now, if I want to plot a number, let's say z is equals to 1 plus 2i, how can I do that? Well, this tells you to, at first, go to this origin, then move 1 unit in the real axis, or so to say in the x-axis. This is +1, right? So in which direction we should move? Do we move left or do we move right?
Right.
Right, exactly. Good. So at first I go from here to here. Okay, so that was a bad idea to do. Okay, so 0 to 1. This is my first move. Okay. And then how can I have this 2i?
Maybe
I'm up by 2 units. So I have to go +2, right? But in which direction now? In the imaginary direction, or so to say the y direction. So that's why, I was calling this y-axis the imaginary axis. So now what I can do, I can go to 2 units up like this. And this marks the point. Okay. What color should I use? I don't know. I get very confused with colors. So this is the point that denotes the number 1, 2. By 1, 2, I mean this number. Okay. Or, equivalently, you can just write z is equals to 1 plus 2i. So think of it like this, if you are not familiar with coordinate system, that's fine. What you can do, you can just take a piece of paper and label them as north, south, east, and west. And I tell you, to find me, or, to find the apple of Eden, you first have to go 200 miles north, 30 miles east, then 50 miles west. And that's just the same thing as this thing. If you have a number like this, it instructs you to go x units along the real axis, and then y units on the imaginary axis or the y-axis. That's all it is. And this type of diagrams are known as Argand diagrams. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so I'll have to finish the session a little early today. So yeah, this is, the pretty much basic of complex numbers, but as I promised, I wanted to show you why that minus times minus thing is plus, right? I wanted to show that. So let's talk about that thing. we defined our imaginary units I as the following, right? Square root of -1. Now let's do one thing. Let's square both sides. If I do that, what do I get? I get I square equals to what? -1, right? So this gives me a new identity. That means I square equals to -1. What if I want to compute I cube? I can write it as I square times I, right? But I square is what? -1. So this is just minus I. And what if I can compute I to the power 4? This means I square times I square -1 times -1, and that yields a 1. And what you can show is that even if you compute I to the power 400, you will get a 1 like this one. So why am I bothering about all these things? Well, now I'm going to tell you something that won't make any sense at all, at least when you see it first, but just, this is more like a storytelling at this point now, because there's a lot of background materials that needs to be covered if you really want to go in depth. So just bear with me and try to, visualize the thing. So what you can do is that you can define a certain quantity like this. This E means the exponential. And we call this symbol as a theta. It's a Greek word. I think I wrote the spelling correct, I guess. THETA. Yeah. So this exponential is just a number. This is 2 times that the Euler constant thing. I forgot the other digits. I don't know. Maybe 3, 4. এরকম কিছু একটা হবে. Whatever. It's a constant. Okay. And this e to the power I theta, what this does is that it instructs you to rotate by a certain degree. And that degree is indicated by this theta. So let's say you have a stick. You have a plane like this, and you have a stick. I want you to rotate this stick by an angle theta. So you guys are familiar with the concept of angles, right? Like, is there anyone who doesn't understand what's an angle? Okay. So this is the initial position, let's say. And what I want you to do, I want you to take the stick. I want you to then rotate it like this to an angle theta. This can be done if you know the length of the stick. Let's call that R, the length of the stick. And then if you multiply this R with e to the power I theta. So now think of this length or this length of a stick as a real number. Let's say I can choose any real number. Let me get rid of that. Let's say 2. This is origin 0 and this is 2. So it has a length of what? 2, right? Because recall that the distance between 2 and 0 is just modulus of 2 minus 0, which is just 2. This is from last class. And now what you want to do, you want to, let's say, rotate this 2 to 180 degrees. And are you guys familiar with the radian? You know, the unit of angle.
Yes, sir, radian.
Is there anyone who doesn't understand what a radian is? So radian is just another unit, okay? Just like the degree. It's a bit convenient to use radians sometimes, but don't worry about it. Even if you don't know about it, don't worry about it right now. So if you can recall that this thing has a length of what? 2. This red line, 0 to 2. Let's call this, you know, AB or something, the rod. So when it rotates about 180 degrees, where do you think it's gonna end up? Where do you think this tip where do you think this yellow tip is gonna end up? Any guess? I want to rotate it anti-clockwise in a 180 degree fashion. Where do you think it's gonna end up?
স্যার একটু মানে একটু বুঝিয়ে বলবেন কারণ
I think it's -2.
আমিও মাঝে মাঝে বুঝতেছি না।
Okay, so you have a stick, right? Like this one. This is the real number line. You have a stick like this. And what you want to do, you want to rotate this thing like this. And you know, this angle is just 180 degrees. My question is, if this is the tip of the rod, where does this tip end up after a 180 degree rotation?
-2, sir.
Sir, -2 probably.
Yep, -2. Why? Because the length of the rod does not change under a rotation, right? I mean, take anything, like take a pen in your hand, you rotate it. Does the length change? I mean, it does not, right? So, এখন যদি আমি তোমাকে বলি যে তুমি এরকম রোটেশন করতেছো, আর আগে যেটা বললাম যে we multiply this e to the power I theta to indicate rotation, তাই না? এখন এই দুইটা জিনিসের ভিতরে একটু মানে একটা ফ্যামিলিয়ার পিকচার টানা ট্রাই করো, দ্যাট ইজ what do we mean by this, you know, মাইনাস এ প্লাস হয়। হ্যাঁ, ওইটা একটু পরে ক্লিয়ার হবে। সেটা হচ্ছে কি, তোমার এই যে 2 যেটা ছিল, আমি বলতেছিলাম যে এটাকে একটা রডের মতো চিন্তা করো, 0 থেকে 2 পর্যন্ত there is a rod and now you are just rotating the rod to 180 degrees into the counterclockwise direction, and you guys said okay, the tip's gonna end up at -2, right? But what is this? This is similar to multiplying 2 with -1, right? That's one point of view. Let's say this is the point of view.
কেন হবে?
Hmm?
-1 কেন হবে?
2 times -1 মানে
ও।
তোমার এই যে তুমি রোটেশনটা করতেছো না,
জি।
এই রোটেশনে তোমার এই রডের পজিশন গুলো কিরকম, মানে ডিফারেন্ট পয়েন্টস অফ টাইমে যদি চিন্তা করো, এটা ঘুরতে ঘুরতে -2 তে ওর টিপটা হচ্ছে গিয়ে -2 থেকে হিট করবে, রাইট? সো -2 কে কিভাবে লেখা, মানে -2 কে কিভাবে লেখা যায়? 2 times -1 না?
জি স্যার।
Yeah. So this is one point of view আর কি, যে 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেশন মানে okay, so let me write this like 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেশন means হচ্ছে গিয়ে -1 দিয়ে গুণ করা। তুমি একটা অ্যানালজি টানতেই পারো, রাইট? যে ইন দিস কেস 180 ডিগ্রি ঘোরানো মানে হচ্ছে -1 দিয়ে গুণ করা। বাট সিন্স আমরা মাত্র নতুন নতুন কমপ্লেক্স নাম্বার শিখছি, সেখানে আমরা শিখলাম যে ও আচ্ছা, আমি যদি কোনো জিনিসটা ঘুরাইতে চাই তাহলে আমি ওইটার সামনে একটা e টু দি পাওয়ার I থিটা লাগাই দিব, তাইলে কাজ শেষ। হ্যাঁ, যেখানে থিটা হবে হচ্ছে এবারে কত, থিটাতে তো একটা অ্যাঙ্গেল, সেটা 180 ডিগ্রি হইতে হবে। সো যারা এটা জানো না, ডোন্ট ওয়ারি অ্যাবাউট ইট। ইফ ইউ ডোন্ট নো, ইফ ইউ নো দ্যাটস গুড, ইফ ইউ ডোন্ট নো ইটস ফাইন। 180 ডিগ্রি মানে হচ্ছে তোমার পাই রেডিয়ান্স আর কি। এই সিটা লেখে অনেকে, অনেকে লেখে না। সো আমি জাস্ট রেড লিখলাম, রেড মিন্স রেডিয়ান। ওকে, সো 180 হচ্ছে গিয়ে পাই রেডিয়ান। অ্যান্ড কেউ যদি কমপ্লেক্স নাম্বার সিস্টেম ইউজ করতে চায়, সে কি করবে? সে হচ্ছে এই রোটেশনটা অ্যাচিভ করার জন্য 2 এর সাথে e⁻i পাই মাল্টিপ্লাই করবে, অ্যান্ড e⁻i পাই ইকুয়ালস টু -1 আসে। সেটা কিভাবে আসে? এটা খুবই ইজি। তুমি জাস্ট একটা কাজ করো, একটা ক্যালকুলেটর নাও and try to compute this quantity e⁻i পাই, যেটা আসলে এইভাবে লেখা যায়, cosine of pi I of sin pi. Sin pi is 0, right? মানে sin pi মানে হচ্ছে sin 180 ডিগ্রি। আর cosine pi means হচ্ছে গিয়ে cosine 180 ডিগ্রি। sin cosine তো আই থিঙ্ক সবাই ফ্যামিলিয়ার, রাইট? ট্রিগোনোমেট্রিক ফাংশনস। যদি ফ্যামিলিয়ার নাও হও, ইটস ফাইন, এগুলোর খুব ওয়েল ডিফাইন্ড ভ্যালু আছে। সো এখান থেকে -1 আসে, আর এখানে হচ্ছে i টাইমস 0 আসে। সো আলটিমেটলি পুরো জিনিসটা -1 আসে। সো টেকনিক্যালি এই e⁻i পাই হচ্ছে গিয়ে একটা 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেশনের ইকুইভ্যালেন্ট। সো এটাকে লেখা যায় হচ্ছে 2 টাইমস -1। এখন তোমার মনে হতে পারে আপনি রোটেশন নিয়ে এত যাইতেছেন কেন? মানে ইউ আর সাপোজ টু টক অ্যাবাউট ওয়াই মাইনাস টাইমস মাইনাস ইজ এ প্লাস, রাইট? Let's focus on this picture once again. This time what you do, you are in -2. তুমি এই পয়েন্টে আছো, এই ব্লুইশ পয়েন্টে। এখান থেকে তুমি আরো 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেট করবা, এবং সেটাও একই ডাইরেকশনে, মানে কাউন্টার ক্লকওয়াইজ ডাইরেকশন আর কি। সো এই ব্লুইশ পয়েন্ট থেকে তুমি যদি আবার 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেট করো, তুমি তো এই দুইতেই ফেরত আসবা, রাইট? মানে ইন টোটাল ইটস এ 360 ডিগ্রি রোটেশন। সো তুমি যেই পয়েন্টে স্টার্ট করছো আসলে ওই পয়েন্টে ফিরে আসবা, তাই না? সো -2 থেকে তুমি আবার কি করতেছো? আবার 2 তে আসতেছো। এইবার পুরো জিনিসটা দেখো। প্রথমে তুমি স্টার্ট করছো 2 থেকে, ইউ স্টার্টেড ফ্রম 2। তুমি গেছো কোথায়? -2 তে। সেটা করার জন্য কি করা লাগছে? e⁻i পাই দিয়ে গুণ করা লাগছে। ইন আদার ওয়ার্ডস, তোমার একটা -1 দিয়ে গুণ করা লাগছে, রাইট? বাট এখন তুমি -2 থেকে আবার 2 তে ফেরত যেতে চাইতেছো একটা রোটেশনের থ্রুতে। সেটা করতে গেলে কি করা লাগবে? আবার পুরাটা ঘুরে আসতে হবে, রাইট? মানে -2 থেকে 2 আবার 180 ডিগ্রি ঘোরা লাগবে। সো এইটা ছিল হচ্ছে কি আমাদের -2, তাই না? -2 থেকে যখন আমি 2 তে আসতে চাই, আমার কি করা লাগে? আবার এই 2 মানে -2টাকে আবার e⁻i পাই দিয়ে গুণ করা লাগে, নাকি? কিন্তু -2 কত ছিল আসলে? -2 ছিল হচ্ছে 2 টাইমস e⁻i পাই। সো দিস ইজ 2 টাইমস e⁻i পাই টাইমস e⁻i পাই। বাট e⁻i পাই হচ্ছে গিয়ে -1। সো এখানে দুইটা -1 আছে। So ultimately 2 can be written as -1, -1, 2. So there you go. যে কেন মাইনাসে প্লাস হয়। মানে দ্যাটস দ্য বেসিক আইডিয়া আর কি। ইনফ্যাক্ট কোনো কিছুর সাথে আই গুণ করা মানে হচ্ছে ওইটাকে 90 ডিগ্রি ঘুরাই দেওয়া। তুমি এখানে e⁻i থিটা এর জায়গায় ট্রাই টু ডু দিস থিং, e⁻i পাই বাই 2 নাও, দেখবা যে এটার ভ্যালু আসবে i। সো দ্যাট মিন্স তোমার 90 ডিগ্রি কাউন্টার ক্লকওয়াইজ রোটেশন হয় আর কি। এবং এই যে আইডেন্টিটিটা, যে e⁻i theta is equals to cosine of theta plus I sine of theta, this is a very famous identity. It's known as an Euler identity. সো এই মাইনাসে মাইনাসে কেন প্লাস হয়? কারণ এই -1টা আসলে তোমাকে ইনস্ট্রাক্ট করে যে তুমি রিয়েল নাম্বার লাইনে যে আসছো, তুমি যেই পয়েন্টে আসো সেখান থেকে তুমি 180 ডিগ্রি একটা ফ্লিপ করবা, হ্যাঁ, একটা ডিগবাজি দিবা বেসিক্যালি। লিখবা যদি 180 ডিগ্রি ঘুরে যাবা, তারপরে যেই পয়েন্টে তুমি যাবা সেখান থেকে যদি তুমি আবার 180 ডিগ্রি রোটেট করো, তাহলে তুমি আগের পয়েন্টে ফেরত আসবা। দিস ইজ হোয়াট -1 অর মাল্টিপ্লাইং বাই -1 মিনস, মানে টু এনি রিয়েল নাম্বার। যে তুমি একটা রিয়েল নাম্বার নিচ্ছ, তুমি এটাকে মানে মাইনাস কি জিনিস, হোয়াট দ্য হেল ইজ এ মাইনাস, রাইট? আর তারপর মাইনাস দিয়ে মাল্টিপ্লাই করাই বাকি, তুমি একটা পজিটিভ নাম্বারের সাথে একটা পজিটিভ নাম্বার মাল্টিপ্লাই করতেছো। দ্যাট মেক্স কাইন্ড অফ সেন্স যে ঠিক আছে, আমার কাছে সাপোজ 3টা অ্যাপেল আছে অর সামথিং, আমি হচ্ছে গিয়ে কি বলে এটারে 2 দিয়ে গুণ করতেছি, 2 দিয়ে গুণ করতেছি মানে আমি এটা আসলে এটা দ্বিগুণ কত, দ্বিগুণ কোয়ান্টিটিটা আমি হিসাব করতেছি। হ্যাঁ, বা আমি এর থেকে ধরো আমাকে কেউ 150 টাকা দিচ্ছে, আমি বললাম যে না আমাকে দ্বিগুণ দাও, তার মানে 150 গুণ 2 কত, 300, আমি 300 টাকা চাইতেছি ওই লোকটার কাছ থেকে। কিন্তু হোয়াট দ্য হেল ডু উই মিন যে -180, -180, -150 এই টাইপের, হোয়াট দ্য হেল ডাজ ইট মিন, রাইট? ইট মিনস যে তুমি যে নাম্বার থেকে শুরু করতেছো, -1 instructs you to rotate by 180 degrees, and if you multiply with a -1 again, you basically rotate in the same direction by another 180 degrees. So the total rotation consists of 360-degree rotation, and you come back to the place where you started. মাইনাসে মাইনাসে এই কারণে প্লাস হয়। আবার প্লাস মাইনাসে কেন মাইনাস হয়? ওয়েল, যদি ওইটা নিয়ে ইনভেস্টিগেট করার ইচ্ছা থাকে, you can show that e to the power I times 0, this is 0 by the way, this is just 1, and this means no rotation. আর তুমি যদি এরকম কোন অপারেশন কম্বাইন করো, e to the power I times 0, e to the power I pi by 2, this is just I, right? And this is a pi by 2 rotation. And তুমি এখানে কি করতে পারো? Well, let's consider e to the power I0, e to the power I pi. This means no rotation. This means 180-degree rotation. The resultant is what? The resultant is just e to the power I pi. So তুমি যদি এখন numerical value গুলা বসাও, this is just +1, this is -1, and this is again -1. So on the left hand side you have a +1 times a -1, and on the right hand side this is just -1. Oops, sorry. So এই কারণে প্লাস মাইনাসে মাইনাস হয়, আবার মাইনাসে মাইনাসে প্লাস হয়। This is the explanation আর কি। সো আমরা যে এতদিন রিয়েল নাম্বার পড়ছি, রিয়েল নাম্বার ইজ নট এভরিথিং। রিয়েল নাম্বার তোমার কমপ্লেক্স নাম্বারের খুব ছোট একটা সাবসেট। হ্যাঁ, কমপ্লেক্স নাম্বার ইজ কাইন্ড অফ লাইক দ্য বিগ ব্রাদার আর কি। And there are weird numbers called quaternions. Quaternions are kind of like the 4-dimensional numbers, Real number is 1-dimensional. You needed only one line to represent all the real numbers, but you need a plane to represent the complex numbers. So in that sense, it's a 2-dimensional thing. And there are numbers called quaternions. You need at least 4 dimensions to represent them. And complex numbers are a subset of those quaternions. হ্যাঁ, এরকম নাম্বার অনেক weird নাম্বার আছে আর কি। Real number is not the end of story. So that was the kind of like I get the fact যে এটা অনেকের মাথার উপর দিয়ে গেছে, কেন কি করানো হয়েছে অনেকেই হয়তো বা বুঝো নাই। Don't worry about it. I will not give any questions from complex numbers in assignments or exams. Yeah, but since এটা সিলেবাসে ছিল, so that's why আমি কভার করছি আর কি। But I understand যে it's a little bit weird for anyone who is saying it for the first time. But even if you don't understand it, at least you know just think of this picture someday. কেন মাইনাসে মাইনাসে প্লাস হয়? That's the takeaway from this class আজকের জন্য। Okay, so any questions? No? Okay. Should I stop the recording? If you guys don't have any questions, then I think I should stop the recording. Okay, so let me stop the recording and call the names today.